The Daily Mail blast Prince Harry, calling him sneaky, dangerous, a deluded narcissist, a threat to national security and a spoiled child.
Sarah Louise Robertson's assessment of Harry's Ukraine visit, published in the Daily Mail, the most widely read English-language newspaper in the world, didn't hold back at all. The language she used wasn't the usual soft, polite tone people expect from royal commentary. It hit harder. Dangerous. Not embarrassing, not a bad look, not just diplomatically awkward. Dangerous. That word wasn't thrown in casually, it was chosen with intent, and the reasoning behind it is what actually deserves attention, not a quick dismissal. The real issue she points to isn't about Harry as a person, it's about the system around him. Harry is still a member of the British royal family. He still has his title. He still sits in the line of succession.
Has a big impact on the British national interest and on our national security, which is why she has used the word dangerous. The Daily Mail are calling Harry dangerous. And that's exactly what he...
That connection gives his voice serious global weight. But here's the twist. None of the responsibility that normally comes with that kind of influence is attached. He's not elected, he doesn't answer to any government, and he holds no official foreign policy role. But when he shows up at an international security forum in Kyiv and calls for America to honor its Ukraine treaty obligations, the world doesn't hear private citizen Harry. They hear Prince Harry. His words get broadcast globally under that royal identity, whether he leans into it or not. The title carries power all by itself. What Robertson flags is a weak link problem, and it's hard to ignore. When someone tied to the royal family, even loosely, starts making independent geopolitical statements from an active war zone, it opens up a real vulnerability.
I am here as a soldier who understands service, as a humanitarian who has seen the human cost of conflict, and as a friend of Ukraine who believes the world must not grow used to this war or numb to its consequences.
Palace can't step in. The government can't rein him in. There's no control over what he says. He's moving without consultation from the UK government, without palace approval, and without the checks that normally come with official diplomatic actions. In simple terms, it's like putting someone behind the wheel of a high-powered car with no license. The machine is powerful, no doubt, but there's no system in place to control how it's used. That's where the danger comes in. The weight of the institution is still there, but the accountability is missing, and that mix is exactly what Robertson is calling out. Some people think calling it a national security issue sounds over the top, but when you break down her reasoning, it's not exaggerated. It's calculated and very deliberate. Harry's repeated visits to conflict zones, including Ukraine multiple times, are raising serious eyebrows. These aren't casual trips. These are high-risk environments, and every time he steps into them, he's putting himself in situations where he could easily become a target. The issue gets sharper when you look at how he's doing it. He doesn't follow the same strict security protocols that working royals are required to stick to when entering sensitive areas. There's no tightly controlled framework around him in these moments, and that gap is hard to ignore.
And it's a disaster. So Charles has got to go there now, pick up the pieces, fix things with Donald Trump. Mrs. President, I'm so sorry about my son's frightful, strange behaviour. He thinks he's a war hero, He goes to Ukraine, he thinks he's a war hero. He was in a helicopter for 10 minutes, like a kid that won a competition.
As Robertson puts it, he's going in without permission, without government coordination, without the protection arrangements that someone with his visibility absolutely needs. And that's where things start to feel unstable. His title still draws attention, a lot of it, but the structured protection that usually comes with that kind of profile just isn't fully there. The risk isn't theoretical either. For someone at his level of global recognition, threats like kidnapping or assassination are very real concerns in conflict zones. Right now, managing that risk falls entirely on his personal team, with zero institutional oversight. That's a heavy responsibility without a safety net. Then comes Trump's reaction, and it cuts straight to the point. When asked about Harry's Ukraine comments, Trump didn't even engage with the substance. Instead, he brushed it off with, "How's he doing? How's his wife? Please give her my regards. Prince Harry is not speaking for the UK, that's for sure. I think I'm speaking for the UK more than Prince Harry."
Prince Harry?
Yes, sir.
How's he doing? How's his wife? Please give her my regards, okay? No, I don't know. I know one thing. Prince Harry is not speaking for the UK. That's for sure. I think I'm speaking for the UK more than Prince Harry.
That response wasn't random. It was calculated and dismissive. Trump, who has a well-known personal dislike for Harry, used that moment to send a clear message, not about Ukraine, but about status. In his view, Harry isn't the UK. He doesn't represent the UK, and his opinions on American foreign policy, no authority behind them. The signal landed in two directions at once. Journalists got the message instantly, and when the British delegation showed up days later, they were walking into that same atmosphere. Whether King Charles fully smoothed things over behind closed doors isn't something public reports can completely confirm. What is known is that Trump and Charles have a long-standing friendly dynamic.
But I appreciate his advice very much.
Would you have
Great
invited him
advice.
to the dinner and to the state visit?
Well, I look forward to the dinner. We're having King Charles come. He's a friend of mine. We're really looking forward to it. We've spoken, and we're going to have a great time. I tell you, if I had that ballroom built, it would be filled. I wish we had more seats. Love the UK. I love the UK. I think they made a big mistake on energy. You should open up the North Sea in Aberdeen. You should open it up. And the other thing is they've made a big mistake on immigration.
Trump has openly praised William and other working royals before, which makes his sharp dismissal of Harry stand out even more. Their private meeting at the White House, held away from cameras, just how Charles prefers, likely handled whatever needed to be handled quietly. Still, even if the relationship wasn't permanently damaged, it definitely wasn't made easier. Charles had to step into that situation with Harry's comments hanging in the air and carry on with official business under that shadow. Then there's Robertson's striking phrase, scorched earth policy, and the timing behind it really adds weight. Harry went from Australia straight to Kyiv, stacking long-haul travel on top of more long-haul travel. Jet lag, physical exhaustion, the strain of non-stop movement. None of it slowed him down. The schedule pushed forward anyway, and that intensity only adds more questions to an already loaded situation.
To be assassinated, and so he goes and puts himself in the danger zone in that way, and then throws insults back at us, at the British people, by saying Britain isn't a safe place for him to bring his children. The insults that he does every time he does one of these, what he sees as PR missions to show what he's about, he ends up insulting us even more. You just think, Harry, if you're trying to get back in...
Robertson's take is blunt. The timing wasn't random, it was deliberate. The move to get to Kyiv, deliver a statement and dominate headlines happened right before Charles touched down in Washington. That sequence matters. The Australia trip had just wrapped with rough polling and weaker commercial traction, and suddenly Kyiv steps in as a full reset. New visuals, global attention, and the kind of war zone credibility that the previous trip didn't deliver, and the overlap with Charles's most sensitive diplomatic moment. That's where things start to look calculated. Whether it's pure strategy or sharp instinct is exactly what Tom Sykes and the Royal News Network have been going back and forth on. The Royal News Network framed it in a way that sticks. Someone who seems too unfocused to plan, yet keeps landing in situations that serve very specific interests. That contradiction sits right at the centre of Harry's post-royal behaviour, and it's hard to ignore when you line up the patterns. Look at the details. The precise timing of the Ukraine visit. The very pointed, "I will always be part of the royal family" statement. The repeated references to Diana during each landmine walk. None of that feels random. It reads more like someone who knows, even if not in a fully structured way, how to pull attention, how to stay tied to the institution, and how to keep that connection working in his favour. Then there's the African parks angle, and this is where things could get even more complicated. Harry still holds a senior role in African Parks, a conservation group that has faced serious investigations over allegations tied to areas where it operates. Those allegations include claims of human trafficking and abuse involving rangers and security personnel connected to the organisation.
The second they get married, suddenly the royal family are a horrible bunch of, intolerant thugs. They're very uncaring all of a sudden. The British press is suddenly really wicked and consumed with prejudice. The United Kingdom's unfriendly and horrible and ugly. The family are dreadful. She turns Harry against his own family and his country of birth and the institution of the royal.
If Harry moves forward with any kind of Africa tour, those questions won't stay in the background. They'll come right to the front. People will ask what he knew, when he knew it, and whether staying in that role lines up with the humanitarian image the tour is supposed to present. That's not something a polished media strategy can easily smooth over. It's too serious, too direct. Now stack that with his "I will always be part of the royal family" statement and the aggressive timing of the Ukraine visit, and it starts to look like a direct test of the Sandringham Agreement's limits. This isn't subtle anymore. Tom Sykes put it plainly. Harry is daring his father to take action on the titles. And this isn't some quiet tension behind palace doors. The challenge feels public, clear, and intentional. So far, the response hasn't been loud, but it's there. The reported removal of a Sandringham invitation sends a message, even if it wasn't delivered through an official statement. It's controlled, it's quiet, but it still signals that the institution is reacting, just not in a way that turns the volume all the way up. Now the pressure shifts to Charles. Will he actually step in with a formal response, or keep things quiet? That's the big question Robertson is pushing. An official move could come in different forms: an order in council, a direct palace statement, or even something as subtle but powerful as updating the royal website to remove Harry and Meghan from the official listing. None of those options are small. Everyone sends a message. Robertson's closing line cuts deep. You threw it away. You didn't give up your royal duty. You threw it away. That's not just criticism. That's a full-on judgment of what happened at Sandringham. Because at that summit, the late Queen gave Harry a clear choice. Stay in or step out. He chose to leave. He chose California. He chose a commercial path. And everything that's followed, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, Spare, the Australia trip, the Kyiv speech, all of it traces back to that same decision made in January 2020. It's not a series of separate moves. It's one choice, playing out again and again in different forms. So when Harry stands on a stage in Kyiv and suggests he's still operating like a working royal, it doesn't reverse anything.
But out of its own enduring role in global security and strategic stability. And what I see here in Ukraine is that same principle. As President Zelensky has made clear, we are defending our right to live. So, the question is no longer whether Ukraine will stand. You have already answered that. The question is, will the rest of the world match your resolve? Because one day soon, this war will end. And history will not ask what we said, it will ask what we did.
If anything, it sharpens the contrast. The gap between what's being said and what's actually true becomes impossible to ignore. And that gap, it's now out in the open. Robertson has laid it out from the Daily Mail's platform. Trump brushed it off from the Oval Office with clear dismissal. The palace signalled its stance quietly by pulling the Sandringham invitation. Even public opinion is locked in. YouGov polling sits around 30% support, while a Roy Morgan poll shows disapproval as high as 81%. Then there's Harry's own statement. I will always be part of the royal family. I am doing the very thing I was born to do. That line now sits permanently on record, right next to years of actions that critics say don't line up with it, and that contrast keeps building over time, because the record doesn't reset, it stacks. Every interview, every appearance, every speech adds another layer, and according to Robertson's long-view approach, what's been built since 2020 is the strongest case yet for the institution to respond in a clear, decisive way. That's why she uses the word dangerous and stands by it. At some point, the palace has to decide how to handle this. Do they absorb the hits and move on, or do they draw a hard line like the Queen attempted back in January 2020? Because now that original line has been openly challenged. The statement, I will always be part of the royal family, doesn't just stretch the agreement, it pushes directly against it. And with the Sandringham invitation already pulled, the signal is there. Quiet, controlled, but impossible to miss. It's a start. But for Robertson, and for that 30% approval rating, it's nowhere near enough. The real tension sits in one uncomfortable question. Is Harry acting without thinking, or is he playing this more carefully than it looks? Robertson's sneaky and sly framing doesn't pick a side outright. It walks the line between both. The Royal News Network dug into the ITV interview footage, and what they pointed out is hard to ignore. The slight step backward, the quick glance toward a handler, The visible discomfort when Ship followed up about the state visit.
And she's so right. She says he threw away everything he had. Sarah Louise, you're going to see her in just a second. Harry's undermining Charles and undermining William. The other killer line. She says there's a sneakiness to this and a slyness. Harry is sneaky and sly, and I totally agree with that.
It all suggested something real. That moment didn't look staged. It looked like genuine surprise. And that fits a pattern. Someone who came in with prepared talking points, expecting an easy platform, then got caught off guard when the questions shifted. That's where the mix shows up. The calculation and the misstep happening at the same time. Because on one level, Harry clearly understands the bigger play. Make bold statements, grab headlines, keep a connection to the institution, and step into moments where attention is already high. That part feels intentional. But the follow-through? That's where things start to slip. He knows that showing up in Ukraine before a major state visit will get global coverage. That part lands. What doesn't fully land is how those headlines echo afterward, how they play in the Oval Office, how Trump flips them into a public dismissal, how that moment then shadows Charles's arrival, how the clip spreads everywhere, shaping perception in real time. That chain reaction doesn't seem fully accounted for. It's like knowing how to make a move, but not seeing the whole board. That's what Robertson is getting at with the idea of engage brain. Not a question of basic intelligence, but a pattern of not fully tracking consequences beyond the immediate moment. Ukraine, in that sense, checked all the boxes for impact. A global stage, a serious setting, the chance to reference Diana, and a way to reinforce a humanitarian image while drawing massive attention. That part worked exactly as expected. What didn't get factored in was the backlash loop, the way that same moment gets reframed by others with more power in the room. Trump brushing it off publicly just days before the King's visit turned the narrative fast, and that shift stuck. Then there's the bigger contradiction sitting underneath everything. Harry talks about service, about purpose, but he stepped away from official duty, openly criticized the institution that gave him that platform, and now still taps into its weight when it suits his message. That's the core tension right there. The same royal connection that makes a Kyiv speech headline news is the one he formally stepped back from in January 2020. And now, that influence is still being used.
So now what Harry's doing, Sarah Louise Robertson is right on two fronts. So she said he's upstaging his father, but he's also destroying Charles and destroying the royal family. It's not enough to compete with the royal family. They want to destroy it.
Just without the structure, the limits, or the accountability that used to come with it. Those obligations are what make any use of royal status actually legitimate, and that's the line Harry keeps blurring. He can't separate the influence from the institution that created it and just claim the benefits. It doesn't work like that. The late Queen understood it clearly. Robertson has been pointing it out for years, and that statement from Kyiv, it suggests Harry still doesn't fully get it. Then there's the reaction from Ukraine itself, and this is where things get even more uncomfortable. The polished narrative doesn't really address it, but not everyone on the ground welcomed the visit. Some Ukrainian commentators and viewers pushed back, questioning the purpose behind it. The criticism isn't subtle either. There's a growing view that moments like this risk turning real suffering into content, into something used for attention and visibility. Mark Dolan raised it directly, and similar reactions have shown up in Ukrainian responses too. It echoes that same kind of backlash seen in other situations, where serious tragedy gets pulled into media moments. Because at the center of this is a brutal reality. Ukraine is in an active, existential conflict with a nuclear power. And for some observers, a British former royal walking through a demined field while referencing his mother's Angola visit from decades ago doesn't necessarily add value to that reality. Even if the intention is genuine, the impact can land very differently. What it does create, very clearly, is global content. Footage, headlines, emotional callbacks, all of it feeds into a visibility cycle that any modern public figure relies on. And that's where the skepticism builds. Robertson takes it a step further with a serious claim that Harry's actions could indirectly put William and Charles at risk in a similar structural way to how past vulnerabilities have affected the institution. That's not about drama, that's about security. Because when someone with Harry's profile, title, and global recognition operates in conflict zones without government coordination, without security service alignment, and without the strict protocols working royals follow, it creates a gap, and that gap can be exploited. It's bigger than personal safety. The concern is that bad actors could see Harry as an accessible pressure point, someone visible, connected, but not fully protected or controlled by the institution. That creates a scenario the palace can't manage and can't shut down easily.
The El Trumpo, the orange one, he loves Team Wales. Trump is on Team Wales. Trump loves the King and he loves William.
That's the core of Robertson's dangerous label. And when you break it down like this, it's not exaggerated. It's a calculated warning. Now the institution has started to respond, even if quietly. The withdrawal of the Sandringham invitation, now reported and circulating, marks a line being drawn. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's deliberate. And it's also the smallest possible move they could make. No public confrontation, no major announcement, just a denial of a moment that would have produced exactly the kind of royal family imagery Harry's operation benefits from. Still, it's a signal. And according to Robertson, the Daily Mail, and even the polling data, from YouGov to Roy Morgan, that signal isn't enough. The pressure for a stronger, clearer response is only getting louder, and Harry himself may have just handed critics the clearest reason yet for stronger action. That "I will always be part of the royal family" declaration isn't just a statement, it's being treated as justification for something more formal stepping in. Lady Colin Campbell has pointed to an order in council as the tool to do it, not as punishment, but as a clean reset. The idea is simple but powerful. Remove the princely style and the Royal Highness designation from anyone no longer working inside the system. That's the kind of institutional clarity Robertson's dangerous argument is pushing toward. Because this isn't really about revenge, it's about definition. The late Queen tried to draw that line back in January 2020. A clear split, a working role or a private life. But what started as a private agreement now looks shaky, especially after that ITV Kyiv interview put everything back into the spotlight. From that perspective, it starts to look like one side has already broken the deal, publicly. And once that happens, quiet arrangements stop working. It shifts into something that may need to be formal, visible, and impossible to misinterpret.
Family, 6 years ago, you walked out, and the Queen, your late grandmother, told you you can't have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, half and half, doing what you say is your royal duties, your royal chores. And this is another thing Harry's trying to do. He's trying to say he can still be royal and do royal work.
Robertson didn't leave it vague either. She ended with a direct message to Harry. If you want to come back, eat humble pie, apologize to everybody, hold your hands up and say you can't do this. If that's sincere, then we'll start looking at things. That's the door, but it's a narrow one. And right now, it's not the path he's taking. Standing on a Kyiv stage and repeating, "I will always be part of the royal family," moves in the opposite direction. It reinforces the tension instead of resolving it. The reaction in the studio said it all. Pigs might fly. Not subtle, but it reflects how unlikely that turnaround seems based on everything that's already happened, and the record backing that up just keeps growing. Look at the sequence. The King is in Washington handling official duties. Robertson has made her position clear. The Daily Mail has stamped the word dangerous on the situation. Trump publicly brushed Harry aside from the Oval Office. The Sandringham invitation. Gone. And while all of that stacks up, Harry appears to be moving on to the next stage, the next speech, the next platform where he can repeat that same message about purpose and identity. The cycle keeps going. Meanwhile, the institution is watching, and the long-term record doesn't rush. It builds piece by piece, moment by moment. And according to Robertson's framing, the risk tied to all of this isn't hypothetical. It's real. That's where the comparison to Andrew comes in, and it's not being made lightly. It's about the pattern. What happens when a high-profile royal operates outside control and becomes a point of vulnerability? In Andrew's case, his associations turned into a full-scale international issue that the palace couldn't contain once it reached a certain point. It forced a formal response only after the situation became impossible to manage quietly. That precedent matters here, because it shows how quickly a private situation, meaning outside official duties, can spill into something much bigger when there's no oversight in place. And once that line is crossed, the institution doesn't always get to choose the timing of its response anymore. The stripping of the Royal Highness style, the removal from official duties, the complete exit from a public institutional role.
Surely won't forget now Harry's treachery, his wicked selfishness, his arrogance, his cruelty, his stupidity.
None of that happens quickly or easily. In Andrew's case, it dragged on, and many observers said it took far too long before action finally came. But eventually, it did happen, and the mechanism behind it matters. It came down to constitutional authority. The sovereign has the power to decide who carries royal titles and institutional weight. That same tool, as Lady Colin Campbell points out, is sitting there in plain sight when it comes to Harry's situation too. Now, to be fair, Harry's case isn't identical to Andrew's, and Robertson does acknowledge that. Andrew's scandal was personal and legal. His association with Jeffrey, the Virginia Giuffre lawsuit, and that BBC interview that completely backfired. It was direct, specific, and tied to clear events. Harry's situation hits differently. It's more political, more institutional, and a lot less contained. We're talking about publicly claiming a working royal role, making independent geopolitical statements, and building commercial projects that still lean on royal proximity. The impact isn't tied to one moment. It's spread out, ongoing, and harder to pin down. But that's exactly where Robertson's dangerous argument lands. She's saying that even though the damage looks different, it has built up to a point where it can't just be brushed off anymore. It's crossed a line, just in a slower, more layered way. Here's the real tension. There's a difference between a threshold being reached and the institution actually admitting it's been reached. That gap is where everything is sitting right now. The withdrawal of the Sandringham invitation. That's a signal. A quiet one, but still a signal.
Rejected. How good is Lee Cohen? He goes on to say Harry talks about his service, yet walked away from duty, trashed the institution that gives him relevance in public, and now repurposes its prestige for personal crusades. These are some of the cleverest words I've ever heard about Harry. He goes on to say, Harry is a walking liability. When will the palace or parliament take the necessary action to cut his wings and prevent further damage? He's nailed.
It suggests the palace has started to see certain moments like the Australia tour as breaking points. Some reports even frame it as the final straw. Then came the Ukraine interviews with that repeated, "I will always be part of the royal family" line, and suddenly the pressure ramps up again. Another threshold, even harder to ignore. So now the question gets sharper. Does the palace move toward a formal public response? Or do they keep handling this behind closed doors, absorbing the impact and sending quiet signals instead? That's where Robertson's role becomes uncomfortable. But important. She's putting the question out in the open, the one institutional management would probably rather keep contained. And once that question is out there, it doesn't just disappear. At what point does staying silent stop being patience and start looking like complicity? That's the question now hitting out in the open, and it's not a small one. When does the lack of a formal response start to feel like quiet approval? Because look at the reality. The royal website still lists Harry and Meghan, the titles are still there. And after the Ukraine interviews, where he openly claimed a lasting working royal identity, the response wasn't a clear statement. It was the withdrawal of a private invitation. That's it. That gap between what's being done and how the institution responds is exactly what Robertson is zeroing in on. And it's not built on one moment. It's been stacking up over time, piece by piece, all through this post-exit era. The record is long now, and it's not fading. The ITV interviews, that declaration, Trump's dismissal, the Sandringham withdrawal, Robertson's assessment, the Daily Mail calling it dangerous.
It's dangerous that it has implications for the British national interest and national security. Why? Well, because you've got a leading member of the royal family, Harry, who, by the way, has torn up his agreement with Elizabeth about not being an active frontline serving royal. Remember, the Queen said, you can't be in or out. It's one or the other. You can't be half in, half out. Well, he's torn that up. And now he's entered geopolitics.
And that's just the recent wave. Go further back, and it gets even heavier. The Australia tour fallout, the Roy Morgan numbers, the widely circulated photo moments, financial questions, public allegations, legal tensions, media leaks, draft statements, the clothing controversy, the short appearances, the empty setups. It all adds up. None of it disappears. It sits there, building a timeline that's easy to follow and hard to ignore. And while that record grows, the institution is watching. From a king handling global duties, from a future king being positioned for a modern era, and from the legacy of a queen whose warnings seem to echo louder with each new development. And now the pressure shifts to one final point. What happens next? Because whatever the palace decides, that decision becomes part of the same record too. Robertson called it dangerous. The timeline backing it up keeps growing, and the response, or lack of one, will be judged just as closely. If you've made it this far, drop your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment.